So you can't like you can't get away with that stuff like you used to be able to, right? Because the internet is sort of, even though it's not permanent in the sense of as a clay tablet, it has a permanence and a distribution that's way beyond what we're used to. People will catch you, right? So pathos. The pathos is the way in which images can reach out to our emotions. So this is Mayor Nenshi, and this is after the floods that hit Calgary in southern Alberta. And I think it's a great image for emotion on a bunch of different levels, because there's a bunch of codes that are kind of playing together that create, without saying anything, that create a very succinct visual statement about who Nenshi is and what the city of Calgary is. So anyone want to spot, like, these are connotative, right? So on that connotative level, what are some of the things that are happening here visually? Tina?
Well, he's wearing a one shirt, so city's everyone. He's the top guy.
That's right.
He's got his hats off to them.
That's right.
Which is also a congratulations.
That's right. So not only is he the leader, but he's also a humble leader, right? Okay, good. What else?
This community with everyone wearing the red.
That's right. You have the stadium filled with people. The community is filled with people. They're all on the same team. There's sort of the adversarial idea of fighting some kind of, group or opponent together, right? What else? I mean, he's got that sort of 1,000-yard stare, right? Which is sort of, again, like, he is very, we'll come back to the way in which images of leaders are now distributed and that. But, so, the hat off, the look, the sort of like determined look, smiling, friendly, number one, typically we're reserved for quarterbacks or kickers or whatever, right? So people who are kind of specialty, leadership, but also part of the team. All without him saying anything.
Also, he's holding his notes down really low. And if you see the speakers who are more aggressive or more kind of powerful, it actually really perfect.
He has a certain relaxed confidence to him.
And an open body.
And an open body, exactly. So, all of these things, like, again, Nenshi was a professor of marketing. So I don't think it's by accident that these things are built into. I mean, I think if he's maybe done it so much that it's become second nature, but he understands the power of the visual. He understands what an image can communicate. I always found that, the late Jack Layton, whenever I watch, he always had his sleeves rolled up, and I found really interesting, he always had a watch.
Yes, he wears one too.
And he wears one. And and who wears a watch anymore? Like,
especially Nenshi.
I mean, people do, but I mean, you don't really have to have watches, right? So, like,
look at the grip. Like, his knuckles are really showing on that mic. There's a sense of strength.
Yeah. There's all kinds of stuff, and that's what's, that's the thing, is that all of these visual cues are working on us on a level that it's just, we know it and we see it automatically.
The angle of the photo too, right? Like, shooting up.
That's
to
right.
Make the subject look bigger, more prominent.
That's right.
If that image was taken from the top, shooting down,
Different.
we'd have a very different.
Completely. And that's actually a whole other, that's a really good point, Aaron, because that's a whole other way of looking at images, which is called like the picturing practices. And there's certain conventions, like, have you ever noticed that, like, great grandma, when she goes for a family portrait, she stands really square and like straight? That's because there's a certain expectation of getting your portrait taken then compared to the expectation of a selfie now, right? So the conventions of picturing have changed and what we expect to get pictured. So one of the ones that's changed the most, for example, is that people of power, when they used to have their photographs taken, they never looked directly at the camera. So if you look at portraits of, let's say, Queen Elizabeth, the older portraits, okay, she'll be 3/4, or she won't be looking directly, because, and especially if you go further back and further back and further back, even when they're painted, they're not going to be looking directly. Why? Because who has the power to look at the king in the eye?
You're not supposed to by protocol.
You can't. So to have a portrait of a king where he's looking directly out of a painting and whoever's looking at him is looking them at the eye, that's like, no. But now, right, it's completely reversed. And so now the picturing process is typically, like, I do work around homelessness and images. You can tell by looking at the photograph who's a homeless person and who's not homeless by the fact that typically homeless people aren't pictured looking directly at the camera. And so I suggest that there's a sort of reversal now, because there's so many photographs taken and there's sort of an equality of idea that whoever's looking out is going to be looked at, that now everyone wants to look at the picture and the eyes. So those are conventions. Those are conventions in picturing practices that change, and you're right, because picturing from the bottom suggests something different than picturing from the top.
I think that sort of shifted with television, because I know that with JFK, he was one of the first ones to sort of purposely look through the television at the audience, and that was considered something really powerful at the time to do that, and very innovative to do that as well.
Well, definitely. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you think about Marshall McLuhan and the ideas of how medium is the message, he would totally agree with you. And in fact, one of the things that we'll chat about is exactly that. That Nixon and Kennedy in the debate, depending on which medium you had, whether it was radio or television, you thought the one won and the other one lost, and then vice versa. So there is a suggestion that, yeah, and with Obama, for example, the use of viral videos and the understanding of what needs to be out there in terms of social media and connection, you could make a suggestion that says that that's not the only reason that he won, but understanding the dominant medium of the time has a very powerful influence on politics. And now being a very visual, very quick media type environment, if you don't understand that as a politician, then you're not as powerful, you're not as relevant as you could be, right? That's the idea. So the last one is the logos and the visual antony. Does anyone, this is a little bit more of a difficult question to remember, but does anyone remember what an enthymeme is? So the best enthymeme is if the glove, in my opinion, of all history, I mean, I guess that's a pretty bold statement, but if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. That's an enthymeme. That's from O.J. Simpson. You guys remember O.J. Simpson, right? Drink apple juice because O.J. will kill you. Remember that? I saw that on a bumper sticker the other day, and I'm like, where did that? Like, how old is that car? Like, where did that come from? Right? And it wasn't even a Bronco. Anyway, so an enthymeme is a two-statement argument, and it leaves a third position unstated. So if we break down, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit, as an enthymeme, it goes like this. There's a general statement that everyone would agree with, which says, the glove was worn by the murderer. In that trial, both the prosecution and the defense would say that. We all agree, right? You agree, I agree, there's no contesting that. The glove was worn by the murderer. Then the second statement is a specific statement that measured up against that general one. So it would say, OJ cannot fit into the glove. And then the last statement is, therefore, OJ cannot be the murderer. But because Johnny Cochran doesn't want to say the word murder, and because he wants something that's easy to remember, he says, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. So although he's using an enthymeme, because he takes one of those out, of those three statements, he takes the first one out, he kind of puts another spin on it because he makes it memorable and he uses a little bit other rhetorical technique. The question is why is an enthymeme more powerful than a three? Why is it more powerful to cut one of those out? Why in this case is it more powerful to be succinct than it is to be more elaborate? Even just by one line.
More memorable.
It's more memorable.
You're cutting out the negative connotation or the one that you don't want people to remember.
Okay, so you're cutting out, you're kind of leaving something implied. And there's another reason that's related to that. Who makes the connection is it me making the connection for you, or are you making the connection between those? You are, right? Because I'm not giving you the conclusion. You're making the conclusion. So from a rhetorical point of view, are you going to believe me more than you're going to believe yourself? No, you're going to believe yourself. Like, you came to that conclusion, nobody gave it to you. It's like the soft sell, right? Put it out there, make the person make the connection, it becomes their idea. Man, that's powerful because now it's your idea and it's not my idea. I'm not trying to convince you, right? So, how do you do that visually? Because this is a visual enthymeme, I would suggest to you. So a visual enthymeme basically is, almost any advertisement that you see is a form of visual enthymeme. because what it says is here, you have a Corona bottle, it's stripped of all its advertisement. You can't really see that, but it says nude beach, right? So it goes something like, Corona is drank on nude beaches in tropical climates. You drink Corona, you'll be on a tropical nude beach in warm climates, right? So you look at this and you're like, oh, that's where I want to be, and the product is there. It's sort of that, the comedian, right? You have the toolkit and the person in the woman in the bikini, and the guy looks at it and says, oh, if I buy the toolkit, the bikini woman will magically show up, right? So visual enthemes make an argument, but they do so in a way in which it sort of implies something more than states something.
Worst eyes in government.
So remember, the first election, Harper had those fireside chats. Do you remember those? And he wore like the turtleneck, and he kind of sat in a chair, and there was the fire, and it was like a really, it was kind of creepy, right? Like it was not like it was kind of, it just didn't do what he wanted it to do. It wasn't sending out the message that he wanted to send out. And after that election, he actually he rebranded, and there's some interesting research on this if you're interested in sports and politics, because he rebranded himself as the hockey dad. And he started to show up at hockey games more visually. He for example, at Christmas time, the juniors, the World Juniors, anyone watch the World Juniors? So have you ever noticed that there's always a shot from the PM's home, from TSN or whoever's broadcasting it, near the final, and it's him watching. So, and the Olympics is the same. One of the only, like what Chris was saying yesterday, right? In a closed government, in terms of communication, one of the only networks that Harper actually regularly is seen on is like a sports network. And he's written a book on hockey history, and this is a visual enthemy. Here he is sitting in his hockey jersey next to the Great One at a hockey game, and it's communicating something about Harper without him having to do any kind of political spin on it, even though it's nothing but political spin, in my opinion. Right? So then, to wrap up, how does this all kind of play out, and what are the implications on when we talk about this power of images to persuade us one way or the other, specifically with Web 2.0? My personal, and Bill Cosby right now is caught in this. You guys remember he made the statement on Twitter, right? He said, "Go ahead and meme me." Remember, or said something to that effect. And now, like, there's a Time magazine. I think I posted one on Twitter. The Time magazine just have the best memes of Bill Cosby and his hat and all this around rape culture and him being a rapist and so on, and it totally blew up in his face. Well, not only do you have the possibility of getting caught when you manipulate it, but more, I would say even more powerfully, when you do this, you then open yourself up to the meme. And if you type in BP oil spill, you'll get like a fly eyes vision. If you do Google Images, you get a fly eyes vision of this image, just like thousands upon, hundreds and hundreds, I should say, of images with Godzilla, with mermaids, with a shark, with Sharknado. Like, it's just, there's a ton of them, right? And it's so easy to do. It's so easy to do now that the meme then becomes even more important as a weapon against you, if you like, if you're trying to control the message from a PR point of view. The meme just takes over. And so maybe they don't realize, maybe people when they see the meme, they don't necessarily realize where, but that means that image just never dies. It just never dies. It's always there. This is another really interesting little stat, 5 seconds. And I would suggest it's actually incorrect. I think it's less than 5 seconds, but apparently it's 5 seconds because there's more patient people out there than me. But what is 5 seconds? Sue?
I'm not sure.
A life of a tweet? Maybe. Might be. It might be. It's actually the time that a page has before you move on if it doesn't load. Like, that's how instantaneous we've gotten. Like, that's how impatient we are. If you go to a website and it doesn't load fully in 5 seconds, you're like, I'm out of here.
Yeah, I agree.
I can't handle it. I cannot, like, you're phoning your provider because there's something wrong, right? Can we just the internet on? Right? Like
Never
you're
done
checking,
that.
right? 5 seconds, that's how fast it is.
Unless you're on BC Ferries.
Yeah.
Then you know, and then you have an expectation, right? So what does that mean for images? Well, there's a really interesting book out by the name Image Bite Politics. Because we've all heard about the sound bite. But this book that looks at images of politicians, understanding that our media is so instantaneous now and that you really only have 3 to 5 seconds of people's attention, has made the interesting observation that you don't typically see pictures of politicians more than like 5 seconds. And so these sort of like little clips where they come up on the screen and then the image is there and the people are talking and then it goes away. So these little snapshots of them shaking a hand or waving or giving a speech, right? And then the commentary comes over. So those types of uses of images where it's just a real short 5-second or 10-second little clip. And so what they did is they pulled all of the images that were associated with politics over the last sort of 3 or 4 elections, and they looked for these image bites, and what they did is they coded them, and they found something really interesting. They found that there was 2 dominant ways in which politicians were pictured. One, which was the way that you're pictured when you're winning in the clip, and one, the way in which you're losing in the clip. And they don't know if it's chicken or egg. They don't know if it's purposely edited that way or whether or not it's just that's what's expected and so it's put out there. But nevertheless, you can look at these images and you know just by looking at these images who's winning and who's losing. So the winning is that your eyes are centered in your, like between your eyelids, so you don't have whites on the top or on the bottom. So your face is more squarely centered to the camera. Your head actually, when it's an animation or like when it's motion, it's like it's not just a still. Your head moves side to side. You're open like this. Your hands are open, so you're moving like this. That's on your teeth. The top teeth are showing, not the bottom. When you're losing, the whites are under your eyes, your bottom teeth are showing, and your head moves up and down in like, and you typically have like a more closed body pose. That's interesting, right? They've also done studies they've done studies where they've shown that the Republicans, and the reason why there's these studies out of the States is because it's big money. Right, the money that's dumped into elections compared to Canada is just amazing, right? So a lot of research communicating, you want to make a lot of money as a professional communicator, go down to the States and do political communication because there's a lot of money in it. But they've done other studies where they've found out the Republican Party is better looking than the Democratic Party. I don't know how they do that, but that's what they're concluding.
Is that winning and losing based on like how they photograph it, or I guess?
So what they did is they looked at what they traced is like, okay, in the polls, how did the polls go? And then what they found is that same kind of movement shifted in terms of the images. So as you were winning, you were more likely to be pictured like this, and as you started to lose, you're more likely to be pictured like that.
Okay.
And again, they don't know if it's like a chicken or egg, right? They don't know if it's because you start losing that you naturally just start like that's what it looks to be like a loser, or if it's that somebody's making decisions to put images like that, consciously or unconsciously, because that's culturally what we expect.
That's kind of what I was wondering.
Right?
Is that
They don't know.
photographs that way, or their body moves?
We don't know. They don't know. But what they do make, and I think it's a valid point, is that you can look at somebody and you can kind of tell if they're winning or losing, and the media reflects that. In fact, it's not just that there's it's actually that it's in the coverage.
So then in media training, I guess they would be teaching them to just whether you're losing or not look like this.
I guess, exactly. That's the exact point, right? So don't change your pose, don't change your stance. Understand that if you're only going to get 5 seconds, you want to be looking like this, not like Like, we got to get out there, and, you know, that's the look that you're going to get if you're losing in the polls. That's a really good application. That's exactly the point, right? If you're going to coach somebody, you're going to coach them to look in that way that looks like you're winning, even if you're losing. Which then leads us to this last point, which is the last sort of discussion, which is the medium of the message, and this is technological determinism versus social constructivism, and we kind of chatted about this before we got here in residency, but, you know, is the medium changing the way in which we understand each other? Is it having that kind of deterministic impact on it, or is it just an extension of us as a tool? So the famous example is that when this, which was the first televised political debate occurred, people who watched this on TV thought Kennedy won. And people who listened to it on the radio thought Nixon won. And so this is like sort of the hallmark example of this Marshall McLuhan's message that the medium is the message. That the idea that Kennedy understood that they had moved into a television era. And therefore he was a television politician. And Nixon was still caught in the radio era, and he was a radio politician. And so his messaging, when you listen to it, was much more articulate, it was longer, it was better composed. But when you watched it, you saw a sweaty guy who didn't look at the camera. And so when you watched it, you thought that he was shady. When you listened to it, you thought that he was intelligent and well-considered. And then vice versa for Kennedy. That when you watched it, you saw somebody that was youthful, that somebody was attractive, somebody that you could trust, somebody that that looked you in the eye, and when you listened to it, that you heard somebody who didn't necessarily have the depth of responses. And so there is the suggestion that Obama understands that same message and understands that the need to be able to go viral, the need to be able to become kind of a cultural icon that is the type of thing that can get memed and go viral and become, as they would say in that book, contagious. That he understands the necessity of being able to harness YouTube and Obama Girl and Will.i.am and Twitter and use people from Facebook and from Twitter in his organization as consultants, because he understands that that's the mechanism by which we communicate and evaluate politicians more than the television now. It's not just, as some would suggest, it's not just about mobilizing people through that medium. It's about understanding that you are understood differently, that you look differently, that you act differently, and that you're understood differently because of the medium. It's not just about getting people to follow you on Twitter. It's about becoming the sort of Web 2.0 president, right? It's amazing because Justin Bieber, yay Canada, boo Justin Bieber. It goes Justin Bieber, Obama, for top followers for tweets, as far as I know, right? So it's Justin Bieber is number one, and then Obama is like a distant second. But that just tells you the power of Obama in terms of his understanding of how social media works. And we'll talk about Twitter with Tamara Small, because she's going to come in and talk about the different uses of politics and politicians with Twitter. I would suggest, if you haven't checked out Nanshi's Twitter account, follow him, not only because he's a great example of how politicians can use Twitter to create community, but because why people follow him is because it's interesting. So he'll retweet somebody's lost dog. Somebody will send a message to him, hey, Nancy, my dog's lost, here's a picture of him, and he'll retweet it. That's what he's doing with Twitter to get engagement, right? So he's taking that capacity to have a dialogical impact or a dialogical sort of symmetrical relationship with the audience to the next level where he actually is engaging with them. He's not just using it as a broadcast, right? And Obama is really interesting because he went on that Zach Galifianakis Between Two Ferns, remember? So he was getting no traction. He was getting nobody coming and signing up for Obamacare. And so what he did is try to win out and get on to Between Two Ferns. And he knew that he would get flack in the traditional medium, but I don't think he cared. Because that kind of press drove more people, that's the whole point of viral, drives more people to watch the video because it's on a whole bunch of different streams, right? And so he tried to sort of to leverage that social media for that effect. And that basically is the end of that portion of it, and then we'll wrap up here in terms of group work. But I think that's where we'll end for the transmission.